What is going on, kids? Today we're back in the shop. Going to be doing an in-depth shoulder breakdown. Going to be a nice, quick, easy video. Just kind of show you more in-depth of what you can get off the shoulder. Now that I've done a couple different breakdowns of whole halves and stuff like that, I'm just going to kind of start periodically going through all the different cuts. I know I just put a brisket video out. So we're going to stick with the forequarter. We'll get all the rest of that done and kind of progress to the rest of the hind quarter and stuff like that. So this is the forequarter. We already have the chuck pulled off, and this right here is the arm. So we're going to go ahead and pop this off. So the arm is technically like pretty much every animal. I think the only other animal that it's attached might be turtles, because I know the shoulders were definitely attached when I was breaking down snapping turtles. The arm is not attached to anything. So as you can see, here's the end of the bone, arm bone there, and this is where the shoulder blade comes off and attaches to the chuck. So if you are a box cutter or you're getting shoulder clods in at a grocery store, the majority of the time it has the blade attached to the actual shoulder clod itself. That is one of the ways people break down forequarters on beef, is they'll pop the whole shoulder blade off with the actual shoulder. I take it off with the truck. So now you're left with this straight line, and as you can see, there is a groove right here that separates the shoulder from the short plate right here. So we're going to come along here, cut around the brisket, and open that up. And we're just going to slowly move this down. Once again, steady pressure. Just using the edge of the knife to open all this up. And as you get further down in here, you see this is the decal of the brisket right here. So what I want to do is cut under that so I leave as much of the brisket on as possible. This arm is going to be grind. We're going to actually stew it because the customer does want stew. And the arm makes very good stew. All right. There's the arm. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this on the bench. We're going to change camera angles, and we'll see you guys in a second. All right. So now that we're on the bench, we are going to break this down further. Now, I've talked about this a handful of times when it comes to knives, working with beef like this. The Victorinox 6-inch flex knife, fantastic. If you are processing anything at all, whether it's chickens, deer, your own pigs, cows, pick up one of these. This one is the rosewood handle, just because I kind of prefer that. But once again, I cannot remember the name of this company for the life of me. I will put the link in the description. This is a 6-inch stiff blade. So there's no flex to this, as opposed to this where you really got some bend. I prefer the stiffer blade because I feel I have a little more control over the blade to add a little more leverage. So what we're going to do, clean the fat off of this guy. I forget what this was. I know it was part Angus. I think it might have been some Holstein too. It was a gorgeous beef. So the first thing we're going to cut off is right up here. This is the Terrace Major. It's one of those kind of hidden cuts that a lot of people will say is one of the secret tender chunks. I agree. It is very tender. I've never just cooked it off myself. But cutting wise and dealing with it, it is very, very tender. It's technically two pieces. There's this part right here that comes down, and then you also have this. You can cut this into steak, stew, stir fry, stuff like that. That's the majority of what I would use this for, is like stew and stir fry. But again, if you wanted to, you could take the whole thing, toss it on the grill. So I like to kind of trim everything up. This customer is not getting cross cuts. And for those who don't know, cross cuts come from the shank right here. So this would essentially be where you would get your ossobuco from. If you were doing, I know it's gotten fairly popular on social media, has been the Thor's hammer. And seeing as this is mostly grind, we might go ahead and have some fun. So we'll see how this progresses. I'm going to go ahead and get, like I said, these gloves on and get the rest of this trimmed up. And once it's all trimmed up, I'll be back and we'll see you in a second. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get this clod removed. So just to kind of explain it a little bit, once again, we've got the femur bone here and here. Right here is essentially the elbow of the animal. So this comes out, it's about that big around, and there are chunks of meat on either side that hold this arm onto there. So what I'm going to do, come up here, you can see this section right here. This is where I start the cut. And then you're just following the bone down. You can come around on the other side. So up here, along this knuckle up here, is where all the tendons attached that actually control the arm. So what you're going to do, bring your knife up and loosen up that tendon. So there's one. If you leave a little meat on top of the bone, it's okay. You're going to go back and clean all that up anyway. And you're going to start moving around. So I was talking about this elbow chunk right here. You're going to feel, if you're cutting this, that your knife's not going to go anywhere. So turn your knife around, make this cut. Different angle than I'm used to because I'm trying to film it. And then once you get that, just come right on the other side of it. And like I said, there is a tendon along here as well. So once you've done this enough, you can position the arm. With enough pressure, you can pivot it. So you can pivot it up so you're not fighting against yourself. You're once again letting gravity do some work for you. All right, so now that that's done, you can take both sections, kind of pinch them together, because now you are only attached on this back corner. Don't drop it. So now, once again, just using the sharpness of the blade and a little bit of pressure, there's your shoulder clod. So I'm going to go ahead and do this as if I did not have a bandsaw, because in all honesty, I'm doing a half day in the shop today, so I didn't get the bandsaw going. We're going to do all the 4/4 stuff that does not need the bandsaw, just because it's a pain in the butt to clean. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this bone. The customer is keeping bones. So we're going to get these all cleaned up. Once again, you can use the bones for making soups and stews and broths, as well as chunking them up, giving them to your dogs. So that's cleaned up nice. And we're going to clean this up a little bit for educational purposes. So you can see right, let's angle it right here. This is where these two bones connect at the joint. So what I'm going to do is come in here, open that up a little bit more. We'll come along this side as well. All you really want to do is just start the opening. And once you get that, it all comes pretty easy. Just a little bit of pressure, help open everything up. Again, I'm doing it this way, one, out of partial laziness, and two, I am aware that the majority of people don't have an industrial meat bandsaw. So, we're going to break it down the old-fashioned way with a knife. And again, if you really wanted to, and you wanted to put the time in, you could break down a whole cow with nothing but this knife. I've done it, and I do not want to do it again. So that is why I've got a big old professional bandsaw. So now that that's opened up, a couple more cuts. This is one of the trickier joints. But again, you got to think about how much this is actually moving and how strong this all needs to be. There we go. All right, so now that's done. You can see all the ridges of how that goes. That's that elbow I was talking about. And you can see how that joint works. Everything just kind of fits in there, moves around. So, what I'm going to go ahead and do is break the handsaw out, and I'm going to clean this up a little bit. So, what I will do, I'm not going to trim anything off yet, because what this is going to do is the added meat on there is going to act like a brace. I'm going to trim that right there. Handsaw. So, what I'm going to do, let's get a good angle on this. I'm going to go ahead and move it. Hi. So, get yourself a good bracing point to hold it down. And once again, let the saw do a lot of the work. You don't want to be putting a bunch of pressure into it because you're going to be fighting yourself. So, all right. So I've broke through on that. It's not the straightest cut in the world. But once again, this is purely for informational purposes. This is not going to the customer. It is going to grind. So I'm not severely worried about it. We're going to do the same thing on this side. All right, so we made it. Again, I am not a huge fan of the handsaw just because it's kind of annoying. but it has its uses. And once again, if you are someone who is just getting started out in this and you don't have the money for a bandsaw, again, you could even do it with a Sawzall. And I actually kind of did all that backwards. As I was cutting it, I thought about it a little more. So if you knew that you wanted to do something like a Thor's hammer, or you wanted to do Ossobuco out of this, you would leave this bone attached as well as this one. Because as you could see, as I was taking the knuckle off of this side, I was struggling to hold on to it. It's because I didn't have a really good leverage point, because this was just starting to flop around. If you leave all of this attached, you can hold on to this bone and really put some pressure on this. And like I said, you saw me, I got into a rhythm towards the end with the handsaw. It really is just a matter of getting a good solid stroke in and not putting too much actual pressure on the blade itself. All right, so we're going to set the bone aside. I'm going to clean this up, and we're going to get a little fancy because we can. So now what you have is a semi-cleaned up beef shank. So what we're going to do is, essentially what the Thor's hammer is your Frenching part of the bone. So you want the smaller end to be Frenched. So what I'm going to do is come about a third of the way down. Make a cut all the way around. So now that that's cut, we're going to come up here and work your way down the actual bone itself. And you're going to stop, obviously, at the parts you've already scored. Now you can do these out of the foreshanks, which are what these are, or you can do them out of the hindshanks. Presentation-wise, I would probably say the hindshanks are better, but that's just my personal opinion. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to come around and clean up this membrane. All right, so now that's cleaned up a little bit. Come up, and the important part about this, and it's pretty much the most important part about Frenching anything. When you're Frenching something, that essentially means you're removing all the meat from the bone. So if you ever looked at like a lamb rack, when the ribs are cleaned up on it, or like even like a tomahawk steak. And what happens is you can see all this membrane right here. If you leave that on, what happens is it gets kind of like yucky and gray and doesn't look very appealing. Again, you're not eating the bone. You're not going to be gnawing on it after the fact. But it's just kind of one of those things, presentation-wise, it makes it look a little nicer. All right, so it's not the prettiest one I've ever done, But presentation-wise, it's not half bad. So that is a Thor's hammer. Again, these have become popular because of things like TikTok and Instagram. You would do these on the smoker or like on a pellet grill or something like that. Something that's going to be super long cook time. So the fact that all of this shank just breaks down and basically starts to melt. And a lot of the time they'll take tin foil, put it over the bone, and what that does is it protects the bone from color and also cooking, and just has a little bit of a better presentation. But like I said, we're going to go ahead and just cut this, but I wanted to show you guys an example of something else you could do with this that's kind of creative and kind of gives you, if you have guests over, it's like, oh, look at that. That's pretty cool. So, what I wanted to say, or started to say, the reason that the hind shank looks a little bit better, if you look at your forearm, you have the tibia and the fibia. I'm pretty sure, don't quote me, I'm a butcher, not a doctor. Cows have the same thing. The difference is, over time, they've evolved to where it's pretty much the same bone. But if you look, I can actually get my knife. I'm not cut down far enough. But that is where those bones connect. So if you did this with the hindquarter, you would have just one solid bone. You wouldn't have this little notch right there. But so what I'm going to go ahead and do, I'm going to get this cleaned up, and then we will go ahead, and when I come back, we will break down the rest of the shoulder clod. All right, so we're back. First thing I'm going to do is break down this teres major. Again, this is just going into grind. But once again, if you wanted to clean this up, toss it on the grill, this is one of those kind of like butcher snacks where you're in the middle of processing something. It's like, oh, we'll toss this on the stove while we're breaking something down. Again, it's very tender. Just come in here, take that membrane off. So, as you can see, it's got decent grain in it. Semi-tender. We're just going to go ahead, stew that up real quick. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and break down this shoulder clod. So this is the section we're after right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove this part. So as you can see, we got some big old chunky tendons here that we are going to go ahead, pop that off. Pop that off. And this chunk right here. So once you take this chunk of fat off, it exposes the seam right here. So what we're going to do, come in, open this up, and separate the clod itself. All right, so now the clod's separated, we're just going to go through and grind this. If you really wanted to be meticulous and go through and pull out all the sections that you could grind, you could lean up for stew, you can. This customer, they didn't specify how much stew they actually want, and they're grinding a couple other things, so I'm not too worried about it. All right, so now we're on the clod itself. What I like to do, especially when I am grinding, or not grinding, when I'm cutting something into stew, is save myself the time and trim everything up as a whole. It will always be easier to do this with a whole primal. more so if I cut it into steaks and then had to trim up every individual steak. While it's still whole, we'll go ahead and clean it up. There's a little tail section right here. We're going to go ahead and pop that off, toss it right in the grind. All right, so now we've got the fat in the back. Again, it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. There isn't a massive fat cap on this. So worst case scenario, if you pull too much meat off, you just come in here. Like this section is a little meaty. Toss that in the trim. Little fat in the grind, never hurt anybody. Too much does, but there is some decent fat on this beef, but I wouldn't say it is overly fatty. All right. So now we have a denuded, Jesus Christ, I got a stroke there for a second. A denuded shoulder clod. As you can see, there is some silver skin right here that attaches to a tendon. So what I'm going to do, go ahead and grab it here and just start working my knife down. And separate this top chunk from the rest. So there's a little section there, we'll pop off. All right, so there's one. And once again, we'll go ahead and do the same over here. All right, like I said, there's a little bit too much meat on here. You can see this side's not awful. Come through, trim that out, and we can come on this side. Oh, look at that. Almost like I've done this once or twice. Chunk that, toss it in the grind. So now you got two really nice lean chunks that we're going to cut up for stew. Again, when it comes to these shoulders, a lot of my customers end up grinding them. But you can do quite a few things. You can cut this whole clod with everything together. You cut it into steaks. And you have pretty decent London broil steaks. Again, like a very slow cook kind of broil process. Or you can also cut it into roasts. Makes a really nice lean pot roast. I do not suggest cooking it in the oven. So once again, you're going to have, they're chewy. Like this is not a, besides the Terrace Major, this is not a pull it off and toss it off the grill kind of cut. And again, I usually do my stew chunks to where I cut it about 1 inch. And on sections like this, I'll just go ahead. I'm shooting for around 1 inch squared chunks. They're a little bigger, a little smaller. It's going to be fine. You want about a bite full. If you have like a bigger section like this, go ahead, cut that in half. And that is all she wrote, folks. So, if you guys like these more in-depth breakdowns of just kind of going through the beef, please leave it in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and kind of keep going with them. Try to put out at least one of these breakdowns a week. Trickled in with some, we've got a lot of pigs coming up. And deer season's coming. Deer season's going to be fun. I know I'll definitely have some bears coming in too. So we're getting into the season where I'm going to have a lot more butchering content and not as much farm content. Again, we're going to try and get at least one video of being in the shop and one video from being on the farm a week. This week might be a light week, so this might be the video for the week. I'm going to try and get a second one out, but we're going to see how it goes. So until next time, I hope you guys have a great day. And again, please like, subscribe, go over to TikTok. I've been doing a ton of stuff over there. And yeah, all of your guys' support means a ton. I love the people commenting on stuff and reaching out saying I'm helping. So I appreciate you guys. Have a good one.